This is my true story. I live alone in a small house at the edge of town. Most nights it's just me, my radio, and the sound of wind through the broken fence. I never expected anyone to knock on my door after dark. But one night, a stranger came, hungry, quiet, and lost. I gave him food. Then he came again the next night, and again after that. I fed him every evening for months, not knowing who he really was. When the police finally told me the truth, my hands went cold. Before I tell you what they said, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. And please subscribe so my story can reach more people. It started one night in winter. The air was sharp and cold, and the snow outside had turned to ice. I was just finishing my dinner when I heard the soft knock. Not loud, not urgent, just 3 gentle taps. When I opened the door, there he was, a thin man, wrapped in an old coat, his face hidden under a hood. He didn't say much. He just looked at me with tired eyes and asked if I had any food to spare. His voice was low, almost apologetic, like he wasn't used to being treated kindly. I didn't think twice. I went to the kitchen, filled a plate, and handed it to him. He took it carefully, nodded once, and walked off into the darkness without another word. The next night, at almost the exact same time, I heard that same knock. I opened the door, and there he was again. This time, he looked even thinner, like he hadn't eaten in days. I gave him more food, some bread, a bit of rice, and a small piece of meat. He thanked me again, softly, and disappeared. I told myself it was just one of those things. Maybe a homeless man passing through, maybe someone down on his luck. But the next night, the knock came again, and then the next. Soon, it became part of my days. I would wake up, eat breakfast, do my chores, and by evening, I would start preparing an extra plate. It didn't matter what I was cooking, soup, stew, or plain bread. I always made enough for 2. I didn't know his name, where he lived, or what his story was. He never stayed long. He never came inside. Just stood on the doorstep, accepted the food, said thank you, and left. After a while, I stopped thinking of him as a stranger. He became part of my nights, as normal as locking the door before bed. I started to notice little things. He always wore the same old coat, no matter the weather. His hands were rough, scarred, like someone who'd worked hard his whole life. And though his eyes were tired, they were calm, not desperate, not wild. I'd seen hungry men before, but this was different. He didn't act like someone begging. He acted like someone trying to survive quietly. There were nights when it rained so hard that the street outside flooded, but still, the knock came. Once, during a snowstorm, I thought surely he wouldn't come. No one would be out in that weather. But at 8 o'clock sharp, I heard it again. When I opened the door, he was covered in snow, shivering, but he still smiled faintly when I handed him his food. That night, I left an old blanket on the porch. The next morning, it was gone. Neighbors started to notice. They asked me who kept coming by at night. I just said, someone who needs food. Some of them looked worried, told me I should be careful. But I couldn't find it in myself to turn him away. There was something about him, something human, something quiet, that made me feel he wasn't dangerous, just lost. Weeks turned into months. I never missed a night. Even when I was sick, even when my knees ached too much to stand, I still made sure a plate was waiting by the door. Sometimes I thought about asking him his name or where he came from, but something in his eyes told me not to. He didn't want to talk. He just wanted to be fed. And maybe that was enough. Every time I saw him, I felt a strange kind of peace. I didn't have much in this world, but at least I could give something. A warm meal, a moment of kindness. In a way, I started to look forward to his visits. The nights didn't feel as lonely anymore. It was strange, I know, caring for someone I didn't even know. But sometimes, strangers fill the empty spaces family leaves behind. I had no idea who he was. I had no idea what he carried on his shoulders. I thought I was helping him survive. But later, I would learn that maybe he wasn't the only one being saved. He always came at the same time. Never early, never late. I began to hear his footsteps even before the knock. It was strange how something so simple became so expected, almost comforting. I would open the door, and he would be there, standing quietly like a shadow, eyes down, hands tucked in his coat. I never asked questions. He never explained anything. I just handed him the plate, and he always said the same thing. "Thank you, sir." 3 words, soft and humble, but there was something heavy behind them, something that made my heart ache each time. Sometimes I'd watch him as he walked away. He never looked back. He would disappear into the night like smoke, fading into the fog at the end of the street. It bothered me at first. Where did he go? Was he sleeping under a bridge or hiding somewhere in the woods? I wanted to ask, but his quiet made it hard. He wasn't like other beggars who talked too much or tried to please. He was still, polite, and carried a kind of sadness that didn't need words. I started to respect that silence. It was like he carried a burden so deep, even talking about it would make it real again. One night, I gave him half my dinner because I didn't have enough to make more. He noticed, I think, because he looked at the smaller plate and hesitated. Then he looked up at me and said, "You should eat first, sir." Those words stopped me. A man who had nothing was still thinking about someone else eating. I smiled and told him it was fine, but deep inside I felt something strange, shame and warmth mixed together. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about him sitting somewhere in the cold, eating slowly, maybe even saving a bit for later. I started cooking more after that. I'd make enough for both of us and a little extra. I wanted him to have real meals, not scraps or leftovers. Soup with meat, warm bread, rice and vegetables. Some nights I even packed a flask of tea for him. He never asked for more, but when I gave him extra, he always paused, looked at me with those tired eyes, and nodded once. He never said thank you twice. Once was enough, simple and honest. The more I fed him, the more I realized how empty my house had been before he came. For years, I had eaten alone. No laughter, no company, no one to talk to. My son lived far away. My wife had passed long ago. My life had become quiet in a painful way. But since he started coming, the silence didn't feel so heavy anymore. It was as if giving someone food every night gave me purpose again. He wasn't just eating from my hand. He was giving me a reason to get up in the morning. Sometimes after handing him the plate, I'd sit by the window watching the street. I didn't see much, just his back as he walked away, his steps slow but steady. Some nights I saw him stop by the old bench near the bus stop, sit there and eat quietly. I used to imagine what he was thinking. Maybe he missed someone. Maybe he had lost everything. I knew that feeling, the hollow ache of losing the people who make life worth living. Maybe that's why I couldn't turn him away. Because when I looked at him, I didn't see a stranger. I saw a reflection of my own loneliness. It wasn't charity anymore. It was connection. I wasn't helping him out of pity. I was helping him because it felt like the right thing to do. There was something honest in it. Something human. No money, no promises, no lies. Just one person feeding another. And every time he said, "Thank you, sir," I felt like he was saying more than those words. Maybe he was saying, "You kept me alive today." Maybe he was saying, "Someone still sees me." But I didn't know then that I was feeding someone the whole town was searching for. I didn't know that those quiet thank yous carried secrets buried deep in the dark. At that time, I thought I was doing a simple good thing. Later, I would realize, kindness can sometimes walk hand in hand with danger. It became part of my life, almost like breathing. Every evening, before the clock even struck 8, I'd start preparing an extra plate. It didn't matter what kind of day I had. If I was sick, tired, or sad, I made sure there was always food for him. I would place the plate on the table, cover it to keep it warm, and wait for the knock. Sometimes I would even sit in my chair facing the door, listening for it, counting the seconds. It always came. 3 soft knocks. Never loud, never rushed. Just the same quiet rhythm that had become the heartbeat of my nights. There was something strange about routine. It gave me peace, but also an unexplainable fear. I never told anyone about him. The neighbors already thought I was too soft, too trusting. They'd gossip about how I let people take advantage of me. But this felt different. This wasn't about being naive. It was about keeping a promise I never made aloud. A promise to not let one more soul go hungry. He became like a ghost in my life, always there, yet never truly seen. Sometimes, when I opened the door, I'd find him already waiting quietly, hands tucked into his sleeves, steam from his breath mixing with the night air. Other times, if I was late, he'd wait patiently at the gate, never knocking twice, never showing impatience. There was a discipline about him, almost like a soldier. The way he stood straight, the way he never crossed the line into my home. It was like he respected boundaries even in hunger. I found that remarkable. The seasons changed. Spring came, then summer, then autumn again. But he never missed a single night. Rain fell, winds screamed, thunder cracked, and still, there he was. I once asked myself why I kept doing it. It wasn't easy. My pension was small, my health wasn't great, and food prices kept rising. But I couldn't stop. Something inside me said if I missed one night, something bad might happen. To him, or maybe even to me. I started noticing small things left behind. Once there was a folded napkin on the porch. It was clean, neatly placed beside the empty plate. Another time, a small wildflower rested on the step. I didn't think much of it then, but later, I'd realize it was his way of saying thank you without words. People who live in silence often find their own ways to speak. I grew attached to that silence. It filled the space that grief once did. After my wife died, the house became unbearably quiet. The clocks ticked too loud. My footsteps echoed too sharply. But after he started coming, there was life again, even if only for a few minutes each night. I began to light a small lamp near the door before he arrived, so he wouldn't walk in darkness. I even repaired the loose step on the porch one morning, worried he might trip. It sounds foolish now, but I felt responsible for him. One evening, I fell asleep waiting for him. When I woke up, it was past midnight, and I thought he hadn't come. But when I opened the door, the plate was gone, and in its place was a small rock, smooth, white, and clean, as if washed by the river. I kept that rock on my shelf. It reminded me that even in the smallest gestures, kindness travels both ways. After a few months, I realized I didn't even know his name, but it didn't matter anymore. The bond wasn't built on names. It was built on trust, the kind that didn't need words or promises. He came for food and I gave it. Simple as that. But sometimes, when I looked at him closely, I saw something deeper in his eyes, something that wasn't just hunger. It was guilt, a shadow that never left. I didn't understand it then, but later, I would remember that look clearly, the kind of look that only someone running from their own past could have. At that time, though, I never imagined anything dark about him. To me, he was just a man trying to survive, And I was just an old fool trying to do one last good thing in this world. After a few months, people started to notice. The neighbors had sharp eyes and loose tongues. They'd see the shadow by my gate, the faint movement near my porch, and they began to whisper. One morning, as I stepped out to sweep the yard, Mrs. Patel from next door called out, "Old man, who's that fellow you keep feeding every night?" I told her he was just someone hungry, someone who needed food. She frowned. "You don't know these people," she said. "You can't trust strangers. They could be thieves." Or worse, I didn't answer. I just smiled faintly and went back to sweeping. But her words stuck in my mind longer than I wanted them to. That night, as I waited for the knock, I felt a small chill that had nothing to do with the weather. I kept staring at the door, thinking of all the things that could go wrong. What if she was right? What if I was being foolish, feeding someone who might hurt me? I told myself to stop, to just pretend I wasn't home that night. But when the clock hit 8, I heard the knock, and my body moved before my mind could argue. I opened the door, and there he was, the same calm face, the same quiet voice. "Good evening, sir." He looked thinner than usual, tired, his coat darker from the rain. I handed him the plate, and he nodded once before walking away. That was all it took to silence every doubt. Still, the questions began to grow in my mind like weeds. Who was he? Where did he sleep? What did he do all day? He looked too neat to be a drunk, too polite to be dangerous. Sometimes his hands trembled when he reached for the food, and I could see small scars along his fingers. Deep, old, the kind that don't heal easily. I wanted to ask how he got them, but something about his silence stopped me. It felt like there were stories in him that should never be touched. One night, curiosity got the better of me. After giving him food, I quietly stepped outside and followed him from a distance. He didn't walk far, just down the road, past the closed shops, into the field near the railway tracks. He sat there for a while, ate slowly, then looked up at the sky like he was praying. When he finished, he placed the empty plate near the fence and walked deeper into the field until I couldn't see him anymore. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept wondering what kind of man chooses to vanish into the darkness after eating alone. The next morning, I found the plate back on my porch, washed clean, perfectly placed. That was when I decided I wouldn't question him anymore. Whatever his story was, it was his. All I knew was that he was hungry, and I could feed him. That was enough. But the neighborhood didn't see it that way. They started to call him names: the ghost, the beggar, the thief. Once, a few boys threw stones near my gate, shouting that I was harboring a criminal. I told them to go home, but their laughter lingered long after they left. I realized then how cruel people can be to what they don't understand. And maybe that's why I kept helping him, because the world had already turned its back on him, the same way it once did to me. My son hadn't spoken to me in years. My friends were gone. And here was this man, silent, broken, but consistent, showing up at my door like a reminder that I still had something good left to give. The neighbors could talk all they wanted. Let them think I was foolish. I'd rather be kind to the wrong person than cruel to the right one. Every night, I still waited. Every knock still came. But now, when I opened the door, I began to study his face a little closer. The faint bruises under his eyes, the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes darted around as if checking for something unseen. He looked like a man on the run, not just from people, but from memories. I told myself it didn't matter. But deep down, I knew something about this man wasn't ordinary. There was more to him than hunger. There was a story in those quiet thank yous, one that hadn't ended yet. As the nights went on, something changed between us, not through words, but through silence. He started speaking a little more, in short, careful sentences. Sometimes he would thank me twice, sometimes he would ask if I was eating enough. His voice was soft, like he was afraid of disturbing the air around him. One evening, as I handed him his food, he said quietly, "You remind me of someone." I asked who, but he only smiled, a faint, sad smile that looked like it had been hidden for years, and said, "Someone who was kind when I didn't deserve it." Then he turned and disappeared into the dark, leaving me standing there with that single line echoing in my mind. After that, I began to notice how his tone carried pain, not just hunger. It was in the way he spoke, the way he paused before saying, "Thank you," as if he was holding something back. I realized he didn't just come for food, he came for a moment of peace. The world outside, wherever he wandered during the day, was hard, cruel, and cold. But on my doorstep, for those few minutes, he didn't have to hide. He didn't have to run. He could just exist. He started staying a little longer each night. Sometimes he'd sit on the steps while eating, and we'd talk about small things. The weather, the street dogs, the rising prices of food. He never said anything about his past, and I never asked. There was an unspoken understanding between us. Whatever ghosts followed him, he didn't bring them to my door. And whatever loneliness haunted me, I didn't send it after him. He once told me he had no family left. The words were simple, but the way he said them, like a man admitting something he still couldn't accept, made my chest tighten. I wanted to ask what happened, but his eyes told me not to. They were full of something I recognized too well. Regret. The kind that doesn't fade with time. The kind that sits inside you like a stone. Sometimes I'd catch him looking at my porch light, that old yellow bulb that flickered when the wind blew. He'd stare at it for a long time before leaving, as if it meant something to him. Maybe it reminded him of home. Maybe it was just a small piece of warmth in a world that had turned cold. Either way, I started leaving it on for him every night, even after I went to sleep. I told myself it was for safety, but truthfully, it was more than that. It felt like keeping a light on for someone who'd lost their way. He was careful, always, never came too close, never accepted more than he needed. Once, I offered him an old jacket, but he refused. "You might need it someday," he said. The words confused me. What kind of man who had nothing still thought about what others might need? There was decency in him, something rare. It didn't fit with the idea of a stranger begging for food. It made me wonder if maybe he had once lived differently. Maybe once he had a home, a family, a life that had fallen apart. I began to think of him as part of my own family. Not a son, not a friend, but something in between. Someone who existed in the small gap between pity and respect. Every time I saw his face in the doorway, I felt less alone. The world outside could forget me, but at least I was needed by someone. That feeling kept me alive more than the food I gave away. I didn't tell anyone, not even when people asked why I left my light on every night. It was my secret, my quiet purpose. Some people leave their wealth behind when they die. I wanted to leave kindness behind while I was still breathing. I didn't know who that man was or what he carried, but I knew one thing: feeding him was keeping both of us human. But deep down, I sensed something uneasy. The way he'd sometimes glance over his shoulder, the way his hands would tremble when police cars passed on the street, the way his breathing changed when he heard sirens in the distance. I thought maybe he had enemies, or debts, or maybe just bad memories chasing him. I never imagined the truth was so much darker. It was a cold Thursday evening, and the wind carried that strange kind of stillness before a storm. The day had felt heavy from the start, though I couldn't explain why. Maybe it was the way the sky stayed gray all afternoon, or the uneasy silence of the street outside. I made dinner like always, saved a portion for him. Warm soup, some rice, and half a loaf of bread. But when 8 o'clock came, there was no knock. I sat near the door, listening. 10 minutes passed, then 30. Still nothing. For the first time in months, the night stayed quiet. I told myself he might just be late. Maybe the rain had slowed him down. Maybe he'd found a place to rest for the night. But something didn't feel right. It wasn't just absence, it was emptiness. The kind that wraps around you and refuses to let go. I waited another hour before I finally opened the door and stepped outside. The street was empty. The lamp near the corner flickered weakly, casting long, broken shadows across the wet ground. His usual footprints, the faint marks I had come to recognize, weren't there. The steps looked washed clean, as if the night had erased him. I went to bed uneasy, leaving the plate on the porch just in case he came late. But when I woke up the next morning, the food was still there, cold, untouched. That's when I knew something was wrong. He had never missed a night, not once, not even in heavy rain or deep snow. For months he had come without fail. And now, suddenly, nothing. I tried to go about my day like normal, but my mind wouldn't rest. By noon, I found myself looking out the window every few minutes. The world outside looked the same, quiet, slow. But for me, something had broken. I didn't know what to do. How do you search for someone you never truly knew? I didn't know his name, where he slept, or who he was. All I knew was that someone who depended on me was gone. And that thought made the air feel colder. That night, I lit an extra lamp on the porch, hoping he would see it from wherever he was. I waited again. 8 o'clock, 9, 10. No knock. The food stayed untouched, the silence thicker than before. I sat near the door, watching shadows crawl across the walls, feeling something close to grief. You can't grieve a stranger, I told myself. But maybe you can, when that stranger became part of your life. The next morning, I woke to the sound of voices outside, sharp, urgent ones. When I looked out, I saw flashing blue and red lights painting the street. Police cars lined up near the corner, officers moving around with flashlights. My stomach twisted. The air felt heavy, wrong. Something inside me said, he's connected to this. I didn't know how, but I could feel it. Then came the knock on my door. Not his knock. Louder, firmer, official. My heart pounded as I opened it. 2 officers stood there, their faces serious. One of them held a small notepad, the other a photo. "Sir," one of them said, "we're looking for someone. We think you might have seen him." When they showed me the picture, I felt my breath leave my body. It was him. The same man I had fed every night for months. The same tired eyes, the same quiet face. I nodded slowly, my throat dry. "Every night," I managed to say. "He came every night." The officer exchanged a look with his partner, then sighed, a long, heavy sigh that made my skin crawl. "Sir," he said, "this man escaped from prison 2 years ago. He was serving a life sentence." The words didn't make sense at first. My mind couldn't connect them. I looked again at the picture. The man who said, "Thank you." The man who refused extra food. The man who left small flowers and washed plates behind. A prisoner? A killer? I felt dizzy, like the floor was shifting beneath me. When they left, I sat by the door, staring at the empty plate still sitting there. I tried to remember every moment, his eyes, his scars, his silence. It all made sense now, in a way that hurt. The trembling hands, the fear of sirens, the quiet guilt in his face. All the signs had been there. I just didn't want to see them. But even then, one thought wouldn't leave my mind. If he really was dangerous, why had he never harmed me? Why had he thanked me every night like a child saying grace? That question would haunt me for days, until I finally learned the truth about who he really was. The morning after the police came, I sat in my chair by the window, unable to eat, unable to think of anything else. The same image kept replaying in my head. His face under that dim porch light, the quiet way he said thank you, the way his eyes softened when I handed him food. None of it fit with what the officer told me. A murderer? A man serving life in prison? It didn't make sense. I tried to imagine those gentle hands holding a weapon, those calm eyes filled with rage, but I couldn't. I didn't want to believe it. It was like being told the moon had killed the sun. Impossible. Later that day, another knock came. When I opened the door, it was the same officer from before. His face looked even graver this time. "Sir," he said, "can we come in for a moment?" My chest tightened. I stepped aside and nodded. They entered slowly, glancing around like they were afraid to disturb something fragile. The first officer sat across from me while the other stood by the window. He placed a photograph on the table, a clearer one this time, the same man, but younger. His eyes were harder, colder. He looked nothing like the quiet stranger I'd come to know. "Are you sure this is the same man?" the officer asked gently. I nodded without hesitation. "Every night," I said quietly. "For months. He came here. I fed him." The officer sighed, rubbed his temple, then leaned forward. "Sir, this man's name is Arjun Mehta. He escaped from Central Prison 2 years ago. He was convicted for the murder of a man named Rajiv Sharma. The name meant nothing to me, but hearing it out loud made my stomach twist. Murder. The word sat heavy in the room. "He never spoke about his past?" the officer asked. I shook my head. "No. He just said he had no family left. He never asked for anything but food." The younger officer by the window spoke then, his voice lower. "We've been searching for him for months. He was dangerous, sir. Please, if he comes back here, do not open the door. Call us immediately." After they left, I sat there in the quiet, staring at the photograph. The man I knew, the thin, gentle stranger, was gone. All I could see now was what they said he was, a criminal, a murderer. I tried to push away the thought, but the words kept echoing in my head. Dangerous, escaped, life sentence. That night, for the first time since he'd come into my life, I locked my door early. I turned off the porch light. But as I sat in the dark, I couldn't stop thinking about him. If he had done something terrible, why had he been so calm, so grateful, so kind? I remembered his hands, trembling but careful, as he held the plate. I remembered how he refused extra food, how he once told me, "You remind me of someone." Who? The man he killed? A father? Himself? I wanted to hate him for lying to me, but I couldn't. All I could feel was confusion, and something close to sorrow. Maybe he wasn't lying at all. Maybe he had been telling me pieces of the truth, just not the one I was ready to hear. The next day, the police came again, asking more questions. When was the last time I saw him? What did he wear? Did he ever leave anything behind? I told them everything I could remember. They took the empty plate from the porch for evidence. Watching them carry it away felt strange, like they were taking away a piece of my routine, a piece of him. That night, the porch was empty again. The wind blew harder, rattling the windows. I thought about leaving a plate out anyway, but I stopped myself. The officer's words echoed in my mind. He was dangerous. But danger never looked so gentle before. I sat up late, staring at the flickering lamp, and whispered to myself, "Who were you, really?" The question had no answer. Not yet. but I could feel one coming. Because the next morning, the police would return, not with more questions, but with something that would change everything I thought I knew about him. It was early the next morning when I heard the pounding on my door again. Not a polite knock this time, heavy, urgent, shaking the hinges. My heart jumped. For a second, I thought maybe it's him. Maybe he'd come back. But when I opened the door, it was the same two police officers, their faces grim and pale. The older one was holding a small brown envelope in his hand. "Sir," he said quietly, "we found him." My breath caught. "Where?" I asked, my voice barely there. He looked down, then back up. "By the river." He didn't make it. The room went still. My knees felt weak. I had to hold on to the door frame. For a long moment I couldn't speak. I just stared at them, trying to make sense of what he'd said. Didn't make it. Those two words felt heavier than anything I'd ever heard. The officer stepped forward and handed me the envelope. "We thought you should have this," he said. We found it in his jacket pocket. Your address was written on the back. I took the envelope slowly, my hands trembling. It was damp, stained, old. My name was scribbled across the front in shaky handwriting. The same handwriting I'd seen once before, when he'd written, "Thank you," on a scrap of paper he'd left one night when I wasn't home. I opened it carefully. Inside was a folded photograph and a torn piece of paper. The photograph stopped my heart. It was him, younger, smiling, with a woman and a small boy in his arms. And that boy was my son. For a moment, the world fell away. My ears rang, my chest tightened, my vision blurred. I stared at that picture until the room began to spin. Then I looked at the paper. There were only a few words written there, shaky and faint, but clear enough to read. I didn't kill him. I tried to save him. I sank into the nearest chair, the photograph clutched in my hand. My son, my only child, the one who had died in an accident 15 years ago. That was what the police had told me. They said he was killed by a man during a robbery gone wrong. That man was Arjun Mehta, the stranger I had been feeding for months. The man they said murdered my boy. But now, looking at that note, everything I thought I knew shattered. I didn't kill him. I tried to save him. The words played over and over in my head. Could it be true? Had the world made a mistake? Had an innocent man been condemned while I spent years hating his name without ever knowing his face? The officer spoke softly, breaking my thoughts. "Sir, we found evidence he'd been trying to contact the family of the victim for years. Your address was written in an old letter, but it was never sent. Looks like he was trying to reach you. Maybe to explain." His voice was gentle, almost apologetic. "We didn't know until now that he'd been living here." I stared at the note again, the letters uneven and fading. He'd come to me not for food, but for forgiveness. Night after night, he stood at my door, unable to say the truth. Feeding him hadn't been charity. It had been mercy he couldn't ask for in words. All those nights I thought I was saving him, but in truth, he had been trying to save me. From hate, from bitterness, from the lie that had poisoned both our lives. Tears blurred my vision as I whispered, "He wasn't a stranger. He was the man who had held my dying son in his arms. The man who'd tried to keep him alive. The man the world blamed because no one listened. And all this time, I had fed him like a beggar while he carried my son's last moments in his heart." I asked the officer where they found him. "By the river," he said again. "No signs of struggle. We think he gave up." His voice broke slightly at the end. He handed me another small object, a worn locket. Inside it was the same picture I now held in my hand, the same faces, the same smile. When they left, I sat there for hours, the letter and the photo spread out on the table. Outside, the street looked calm, unaware that a truth had just rewritten 2 lives. The man I had pitied, the man I had trusted, was not a killer. He was a broken soul trying to make peace with the only person who still remembered the boy he couldn't save. That night, for the first time in months, I left the porch light on. Not for him to find his way back, but so that his spirit would know he was finally forgiven. I didn't sleep that night. The clock ticked past midnight, but I stayed sitting at the table, staring at that photograph and the note. Every second felt heavier, louder. The truth was still sinking in, piece by piece, like slow poison. The man I had fed, the man the world called a murderer, had carried my son's memory for 15 years. He had come to my door, starving, broken, and I had treated him with pity, when I should have treated him with gratitude. The shock wasn't only about who he really was, it was about who I had been, blind, foolish, and quick to believe lies told by others. I thought back to the night I was told about my son's death. The police had come then too. 2 officers, standing in the rain, holding their hats in their hands. They said it was a robbery. They said the suspect had fled. Later, they said the suspect was caught, a man named Arjun Mehta. I'd hated that name for years. It became the ghost that followed me through every dark night. I cursed it, spat it, prayed against it. And now I found out that name belonged to the same man who had bowed his head at my door and said thank you every single night. I walked to the window, opened the curtains, and looked out. The street looked the same as always, but to me, it was different now. Every step he had taken, every time I heard his quiet knock, it all had a meaning I had missed. He hadn't been coming to fill his stomach. He'd been coming to carry his guilt, and I'd fed him forgiveness without knowing it. The shock of that truth felt too big for my chest. I went through the things he'd left behind. An old cap, a torn scarf, and once, a small stone he had placed near my door. I used to think it was nothing, just a habit. But now I realized it was his way of saying I was here. Maybe that was how he counted his days, by the stones he left outside my door. One for each night he found mercy in a place he didn't deserve. The next morning, I went to the river. The air was cold, the water gray and still. The police had already left. Only a few muddy footprints remained by the edge. I stood there for a long time, holding the photo in my hand, and tried to picture what his final moments must have looked like. Maybe he sat there watching the sunrise, thinking about his past, about my son, about the nights he stood outside my door. Maybe he wanted to let go, not just of life, but of the weight he'd carried for too long. I whispered his name for the first time, softly. Arjun. It felt strange on my tongue. It wasn't the name of a criminal anymore. It was the name of a man who had lived with more pain than most could bear. The shock of it all still burned in me. I felt anger, not at him, but at the world, at the people who had locked him away, branded him a monster, and made sure no one ever heard his side, and at myself for believing them. When I got home, I sat down and read the note again. I didn't kill him. I tried to save him. I could almost hear him saying it in that soft, trembling voice I'd grown used to. And for the first time, I remembered something strange. One night, months ago, he had said something I didn't understand at the time. He said, "Sometimes the dead don't need justice. They just need peace." Now I knew what he meant. He hadn't come for revenge or forgiveness. He had come to find peace, and maybe to give it to me too. That evening, I went through my old box of memories. I found my son's school photos, his old watch, the letter he wrote before leaving for college. I placed Arjun's note next to them. The two pieces of my life, the son I lost and the man who tried to save him, finally side by side. The shock was still there, heavy and cold, but beneath it, something else had begun to grow. A strange kind of calm. For years, I'd lived with hate in my heart. But that night, sitting by the window with the photo in my hands, I realized something I'd never understood before. Sometimes the people we think are monsters are the ones who carried the weight for us. And sometimes, forgiveness finds you long before you even know you need it. A few days passed, but the air in my house still felt heavy. Every corner held his shadow. The chair he sat on while eating. The spot near the door where he waited quietly. The porch where his footsteps echoed each night. The silence after his death was louder than any sound I'd ever heard. I thought peace would come once the truth was known, but it didn't. It just left a hollow ache, the kind that grows deeper each time you breathe. I didn't just lose a stranger that week, I lost the chance to say the words he'd waited his whole life to hear. I forgive you. The police called again a few days later. They told me the full story, what they'd found in the reopened case. It turned out that night, 15 years ago, my son had been caught in a fight between thieves. Arjun had been there, yes, but not as one of them. He had tried to stop it. My son had been stabbed in the chaos, and Arjun had been the one holding him when the police arrived. But witnesses were gone, and the law didn't care for explanations. The knife had been near him, his hands were bloody, and the case was closed before the truth even had a voice. I sat in silence as the officer spoke. He said the files would be corrected now, the charges erased, his name cleared. But what good was that? It came too late. The man who needed that truth was already gone. The world had broken him, and then it buried him in silence. I thanked the officer quietly and hung up, my hand shaking on the phone. That evening, I went to the porch again. I made a plate of food, rice, curry, and bread, just like I used to. I set it outside, even though no one would come to eat it. The night air was cold, but it didn't matter. I wanted to feel close to him one last time, to imagine that somewhere, somehow, his soul could see what I was doing and know I finally understood. I whispered into the darkness, "You weren't a monster. You were a man." My voice cracked halfway through, but I didn't stop. You were hungry, tired, lost, and I didn't see it. I just saw what they told me to see. The words spilled out, quiet but honest, each one lifting a little of the weight from my chest. For the first time in years, I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel lost. I just felt sorry. For him, for my son, for all the things time never gave me a chance to fix. The next morning, I walked to the river again. The police had cleared the area, but I could still feel his presence there, calm, like the water itself. I threw a handful of flower petals into the current and watched them drift away. "You saved my son," I said softly. "And I hope somehow he saved you too." As the petals disappeared downstream, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't forgiveness, because there was nothing left to forgive. It was understanding. For years, I'd lived thinking the world was cruel, but that day, I realized cruelty doesn't always come from bad people. Sometimes it comes from silence, from what we fail to question, from the truths we never try to see. When I got home, I wrote one last page in the old notebook I used to keep. The same notebook where I once recorded pain and hunger. This time, I wrote something different. He came to my door, a stranger. He left as my redemption. Then I closed it and placed it beside the photograph of my son. The two of them, one gone by fate, one by the weight of guilt, finally shared a space of peace. That night, I slept for the first time without nightmares. No knocking, no memories chasing me. just quiet. In my dream, I saw him standing by the porch, smiling the way he used to, holding a plate of food in his hands. "You can rest now," his eyes seemed to say. And when I woke up, the morning light felt softer than it had in years. The truth had come too late for him, but not for me. Because now I knew what kindness truly meant. Giving without knowing, forgiving without understanding, and seeing the humanity in someone long after the world has stopped looking. I fed a stranger once, but it was he who fed my soul, one quiet night at a time.